After effectively admitting that he lied about schools putting litter boxes in bathrooms to appease cat-identified students in order to fearmonger about where acceptance of trans people can take us, Joe Rogan actually did something very good. He tried to right the wrong, and he brought on a pediatrician well-versed in treating adolescents with gender dysphoria, and it was a very informative conversation. I'm, of course, making all of this up. He made matters worse after admitting that he lied by bringing on self-described theocratic fascist Matt Walsh, because what else would you expect from Joe Rogan? When I saw that he brought on Matt Walsh, my response was, this was on my 2022 bingo card, because this individual has repeatedly spread misinformation, not just about trans people, but about COVID-19 vaccines, about basically everything now. So it's not that surprising that after messing up and admitting to messing up, he makes matters worse by bringing on a well-known hate monger and propagandist who also, I might add, defended a pedophile named Josh Duggar and claimed that child marriages should be a thing, or I should say implied that child marriages should be a thing. But one thing about this that I do find interesting is that Matt Walsh made a claim that's wrong, predictably so, on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Joe Rogan wasn't smart enough to fact check him, but Joe Rogan's producer, Jamie, decided to do that, and he just debunked Matt Walsh in real time, and it was beautiful to watch. Matt Walsh didn't really know how to recover from that, and neither did Joe Rogan, but let's watch.
You know, there are, child endocrinology clinics barely exist anymore because they've all become transgender. This is what they do now. There are a lot of people, doctors who got into the medical field and they did a certain thing, and then the transgender stuff came along, and that's what they do. Well, it's the same for a lot of plastic surgeons. That this is basically their whole business now, is doing the gender surgeries. And so you see the incentive for them. I mean, they have staked everything on this. They've also staked their professional reputation, because that's the other problem. Not only is it the political incentive and the money, but if they admit that they're wrong, then they're also admitting that they have horribly disfigured and abused thousands, maybe millions of kids.
How many people have had this done?
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, millions.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers? Really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. I can say for double mastectomies, I read a report recently that there were over 1,000 done between 2016 and 2019, and when you compare that to how many were done between 2008 and 2015, it's a massive increase. And over 1,000 girls had gender-affirming double mastectomies in that time frame.
And when you say girls, you're talking about prepubescent?
Right, minors. And that's just up until 2019. And then we know that there's been this exponential increase with all this stuff year over year. So it's a lot. It's too many. Having this happen to one kid is way too many. It's a lot more than one.
Yeah. Look, if you're an adult and you want to do that and you understand who you are and what you are and this is how you feel you should progress, you're an adult. This is a free country. You should be able to do whatever you want. But when you're talking about doing that to children, the fact that so many people are on board and so many people are angry, if you have, people are going to be angry at us that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, they will be. And I also... I actually think that this shouldn't be happening to.
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
This says it's kind of undercounted, but that
would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
Million sounds great.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
The Media Matters will have fun with that clip.
Yeah.
Matt Walsh claims it was. But part of the problem, though, is that we don't. It's very hard to get numbers on any of this stuff, and who are you going to trust when they're telling you the numbers? So that's one of the issues.
I'm not sure if you caught it at the end there, but Joe Rogan said that the millions number sounds better. effectively admitting that he has an anti-trans agenda, because if you inflate the numbers, then it further proves your point that gender-affirming care for trans youth is bad, and it's growing because it's this business, as Matt Walsh alluded to. Listen, if you're actually worried that doctors, pediatricians in particular, have a monetary incentive to transition children, which there's no evidence for that, but if you're worried about that, then join me in calling for the complete decommodification of U.S. healthcare. Do you support Medicare for All, where it's free at the point of service and the government foots the bill? Oh, you don't support that. Right. So you think that healthcare should be a profit-based industry where the goal is for hospitals and insurance companies to make money and not to provide people with treatment. Because if you were genuinely concerned about the trans industry that these imbeciles always talk about, then you would support the decommodification of healthcare, but they don't. Now, I love how after he was fact-checked, Matt Walsh said, well, you know, who are you going to trust? Not the person who was just fact-checked. I'll tell you that. Not the person who goes out of his way to lie about gender-affirming care for trans youth. He has claimed multiple times that children are being mutilated. This is a stochastic terrorist who incited violence against the Boston Children's Hospital, and Joe Rogan brought him on his show to do even more harm, I guess. But there were so many cues there, just with that small clip that we watched, that neither of them knew what they were talking about. There's a lack of clarity that's very obvious. So they talked about Matt Walsh, before he was fact-checked by Jamie, talked about the millions of kids who he guessed were on puberty blockers. But first of all, notice how whenever puberty blockers are brought up, it's only within the context of gender-affirming care, but they never talk about all of these cis kids that are given puberty blockers. Young girls, for example, may be given this to stop them from developing too soon, to stop them from getting their period too soon. So it's astonishing to me that they talk about the dangers of puberty blockers, but they don't talk about cis kids. So if you're genuinely concerned about the side effects of medication, which all medications have side effects, so that's not necessarily an illegitimate concern, you would talk about the way that this affects cis kids as well, because cis kids have been getting puberty blockers, but they don't do that. And on top of that, when the conversation of double mastectomies came up, well, Joe Rogan said, wait, are these being given to prepubescent girls? To which Matt Walsh said yes, but moved the goalposts. He said yes, right, to minors. That's what he said in particular. Right, minors. But that's not what Joe Rogan asked. He didn't ask if these were being given to minors. He asked if they were being given to prepubescent girls. And just stop and think about that for a moment. Joe Rogan, who has a podcast that is broadcasted to millions of people, just seriously asked if prepubescent girls are getting double mastectomies. Why would a prepubescent girl who has not developed breasts yet get their breasts removed? What the fuck are you even talking about? It's genuinely idiotic. These are the people who believe that they can speak with authority on this issue that they know nothing about. Now, Joe Rogan later on talked about how, is there any long-term studies about this? Now, he was specifically referencing puberty blockers and double mastectomies for the rare instances where they happen to minors. But there are long-term studies, not necessarily with regard to that, but long-term studies about gender-affirming care being prescribed for minors. And guess what? The overwhelming majority of them, they stick with their gender identity, indicating that these doctors who are treating these children with gender-affirming care are getting it right. And double mastectomies are very rare, but when they do happen, that is a decision that is made in concert with that child, their parent, and the doctor, and it's a case-by-case thing. You can't just on a Tuesday declare that you're trans, and then on a Wednesday get a double mastectomy. That's not the way that it works. To even get puberty blockers, to qualify for that, that requires a lot of therapy. That requires a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of steps to be taken before that by the doctor and the child. And if these doctors were getting this wrong and overdiagnosing people with gender dysphoria when they didn't have that, then the detransition rate would be very high. But the fact that it's so low tells us that doctors are pretty cautious. They're pretty conservative already in their handling of children with gender dysphoria. It's just that this is a political issue, and propagandists like Matt Walsh are using Joe Rogan's platform to push hysteria over this because it's politically beneficial to them. Because, when you're a right winger, you can't necessarily sell working class people on more trickle down economics and austerity. I mean, you could try, certainly, but it's much more persuasive to make it seem as if we're mutilating children in this country to galvanize people to vote than to actually bring an economic message. And it's funny that we didn't see in that clip, but Matt Walsh frequently will talk about how the genitals of children are being mutilated, which is not true. Children don't get bottom surgery, but he doesn't bring up the alarmingly high circumcision rate, which is done to male infants before they can consent. Where's the outrage there, Matt Walsh? Why aren't you concerned about them? There's no outrage. And before he was fact-checked, it seemed as if Matt Walsh was going to say or admit that he didn't believe adults should be able to transition as well. But I love one thing that Joe Rogan said there. And when I say love, I obviously am being sarcastic. He said, people are going to be angry at us that we're even having these conversations. It's because you don't know what you're talking about, Joe Rogan. You could bring on a pediatrician who's well-versed in treating patients with gender dysphoria, but you don't do that. You bring on the propagandists who make it their careers to fearmonger. Like, we're talking about a monetary incentive here. Matt Walsh is getting lots of money for people who watch his documentary. If you rent that goes to him. So he has a monetary incentive to spread fear about trans people. So why would you bring on the propagandist as opposed to the expert? It's because Joe Rogan is an asshole. I don't know what else to say. Joe Rogan is not bringing on someone who's intellectually curious, who's open-minded, who's objective, who's actually interested in the truth. He's bringing on a propagandist. And if he knows that people are going to be mad that he's even having this conversation with Matt Walsh, which nobody is surprised by the way, but if you know that people are going to be mad, then you're at least self-aware enough to know that people believe you are doing harm. So are you not even a little bit curious as to what their arguments are? Are you not at least a little bit introspective enough to maybe think, okay, if I'm this confident that trans healthcare is bad, maybe I should bring on someone to debate? He's not. Joe Rogan he's not. He's just functionally a right-wing propagandist at this point in time. I think that the ghost of Rush Limbaugh has possessed Joe Rogan, and he's now just a propagandist for the right. And it's really frustrating to see, but this is a man who has no sense of responsibility for his platform. So, that's not necessarily new news. It's just nice to see that sometimes when he brings on these liars, they do get fact-checked, thanks to Jamie. So thank you, Jamie. We appreciate you. Please do this more frequently, although I don't necessarily know if he's allowed to. But since Matt Walsh brought it up, you could fact-check me. He was fact-checked, and he was proven false. Shocker, right?
Up yours, up yours, up yours.
Sons of bitches.
Woke moralist, moralist.
I dreamed I saw my maternal grandmother. She was stroking herself absent-mindedly. I let her have her way. Her genital region was exposed. I let her have her way.